Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about Autechre and their 6th album, Confield. Alright then, we've officially made it to the deep end. LP5 may have shown these guys heading in a more cerebral direction than anything they'd put out previously, and that in itself put some people off, even though I think they kept it pretty accessible, all things considered. Sure, it's very much active listening music, but they still made sure to make it all approachable to an outsider. There's still present melodies and regular rhythms that are not difficult to get into. It still feels pretty grounded and well structured. Confield, meanwhile, is not really interested in approachability at all anymore. From here, Autechre disappeared down the experimental rabbit hole and never really looked back at the old techno rhythms again. And for a lot of people, this was either where you became a fan for life or jumped ship entirely. I heard plenty of people say this project is their favorite from Autechre overall, even other critics I regularly watch. Hi, Oliver. And they'll be quick to gush about this album's massive technical achievements and attention to detail. The project certainly sounds like the kind of thing took a ton of work to make, and a lot of creativity as well. I mean, there's no other project I really know of that sounds like Confield, at least outside of the duo's own catalog. But I've also heard lots of people say this project was too much for them, that it went too far out into the experimental realm to the point of being indecipherable or forgetting to actually sound like, music. As for where I stand, you may be able to figure out from the general tone of my LSEC review years ago and various other comments I've made on this duo that I personally tend to sympathize a little more with the crowd that jumped ship at Confield. As much as I cannot deny the technical achievements this album accomplishes, technical prowess alone does not a good album make. I do have my limits when it comes to experimental music, and projects like this I tend to respect more than I actually enjoy. Though at the same time, to say that I don't enjoy Confield at all would also be lying. I actually do think this album is pretty good. I just don't love it. I kinda occupy more of a middle ground with this album. There are moments here which don't really connect with me and do in fact feel like a bit much. But there are also moments here which I think are great, and great in a way that I can only get from this album. It's kind of a mixed bag as far as I'm concerned. Not one of my big favorites in their catalog, but I can lean a bit more towards the positive on this one. I think it's good. So yes, let's get into individual tracks. When you first start out this project, it doesn't seem to really let you know how crazy things are gonna get. VI Scose Poise is a pretty chill opener, a lot of glitched up noises that sound like tapping on vases and empty bottles, and even some low-key electric piano notes floating over the mix later on. I mean, it lets you know the kind of detail and frantic glitching that you're gonna get on this project, and I do really like its marginally more pleasant-sounding mix compared to the rest of this thing, but it's still more like a warm-up compared to where you go from there. No, the album doesn't really start to get going until the second track, Cfern, and I gotta say, as all over the place as my enjoyment of this album has been over the years, the one constant for me has always been Cfern. Easily my favorite track on the album right from the first time I heard it, and one of my favorite tracks from these guys ever. Main reason for that is vibraphones. This track has pretty present vibraphone melodies, and I've always loved the sound of that particular instrument. Hearing it in the context of such a weird IDM track like this was always really refreshing, and I can't really think of any other track in the genre off the top of my head that uses it so prominently. But it's not just that one instrument. The track is pretty heavily jazz-influenced as well in the way its beat comes together. The kind of thing that at first sounds like it's just thumping about at random, but once you find like this, it has this triplet focus groove. That random thumping becomes more like a playful bounce that's much smoother and more satisfying than it might initially let on. Of course, the initial moments of this track don't dictate the sound of the whole thing. As this track goes on, it eventually gets darker, the rhythms get more irregular, the vibraphones slip away into buzzing synth notes, and the whole thing feels like you're slowly being lowered into the underworld. And the very second that I think this track has gone long enough, it cuts off right at the first sign of the groove getting stale in any way. Just perfect place to finish, right there. I don't know why more people don't highlight this track as a standout. Also recommend checking out the orchestral cover of this track by Alarm Will Sound. I think playing the piece with live instruments really highlights the elements of this track that have always resonated with me so much, and that version might be even more disorienting to listen to than the original. Not necessarily better, but, certainly worth seeking out. But I digress. Moving on to the next track, Pen Expers. I don't remember what I thought of this track when I first heard this album in my first year of college, but I do know that it's been a consistent favorite while working on this review. The beats on this one have this very 80s-ish texture to them that has some visceral weight and punch, and the way they go up against those organ-like synths makes for a really engaging mix that hits super hard, even as the rhythms get progressively more unconventional and all over the place. Now, all of these tracks have slowly gotten stranger and less rhythmically conventional as they've gone along. And not only is this more or less the case with all the remaining tracks, it's also the case with the album as a whole. These tracks seemingly feel less and less grounded the deeper into the album you go. Sim Gishel, for instance, may have a fairly simplistic and minimal beat, but on top are all these wavering pads that feel like they're struggling to stay in reality and already form really dissonant and unnerving harmonies as is. And even then, the beat doesn't really stay simplistic the whole time. This is also the point at which the album starts to lose my interest a little. That track in particular is not really that fun for me to listen to be honest. I mean, the rest of the album is cool, but nothing really reaches the stuff in that first third. At least beyond Sim Gishel, it does remain pretty interesting. The beats of Parhelic Triangle feel like the musical equivalent of being trapped in a washing machine stuck on the wash cycle, getting spun around and getting, soap flung in your face, while the synths on top just sound like these gigantic wind chimes that they do create a spooky atmosphere. Also, it's got a fake fade out right at the end too, because why not? So yeah, that one's pretty cool. And then Bine, I do like that one. It stands out in the album as probably the darkest and most outwardly strange and alien moment on the project. All these layers of percussion flying about, not really forming any recognizable pulse, and going up against these giant metallic synth pads also creates some pretty intense atmosphere that I can get behind. That is the one track from the latter two-thirds of this project that's most consistently stuck out to me as a highlight. Pretty neat stuff. It is worth noting also that while the percussion on this album often sounds like it's being assembled at complete random, it's not really that random. They're working in generative elements in the mix here. Booth describes them as quantifiable. It may just be following some kind of complex equation, but they still have a lot of control over where the percussion happens to go. Not the kind of thing you might be able to guess just listening to it. It sounds pretty random and all over the place, but whatever. I'm sure that was something someone was going to ask me about, but yes, that is a thing on this album. The last third of this album, it's all fine, but I'm not huge on it. Eidetic Casin has all these cool organ-ish melodies, I suppose, but doesn't really stick out much in the track listing. Uvial does have some other atmospheric, glassy melodies, but I don't think it's quite as compelling a mix as Parhelic Triangle or Bine. Some of these percussion textures sound like someone loudly snoring. And then there's the ending, Lentic Catachresis. This is a track I want to like more than I think I actually do. It's not one I think I'd ever seek out on my own time, but the way it works into the album, like pacing-wise, and how it basically sums up the whole album in a nutshell while also going to the album's most chaotic extremes, you don't get a more perfectly fitting ending to this album than that. It starts out innocently enough with a mix of thin melodic pads, thin percussion forming an almost regular beat, and what sounds like possibly voices being glitched up into oblivion and not being recognizable as much of anything besides random, almost demonic sounding effects. Yeah, all innocent and stuff. Certainly not the weirdest texture explored on this album. But the beat gets less regular, the pads get less focus, and halfway through there's no coherence to anything. It's devolved in complete rhythmless chaos with chopped up shards of whatever groove you started with, flying around at high speed, and then as everything once recognizable has fully been deteriorated into complete nonsense, the track ends in a couple of stutter loops of the whole mix, and that ends the whole album. This track is a bit much to take in, to put it lightly, and while I would be lying if I said I personally enjoyed it much, it's just so overwhelming and I feel like I'm listening to complete nonsense sometimes. I also can't imagine a more fitting ending to this project. It seems only right that on an album packed to the brim with glitchy sounds, the final few seconds of this album is glitchy sounds getting stuttered and glitched up again. Like, we glitched up your glitches, we're meta-glitching now. I feel like if you ended the album in any other way, it would almost seem like you missed a trick. So yeah, that's Confield. Mixed thoughts on it. The first third of this album is great and a lot of experimental fun, but after that it feels like it barrels off into some other universe and it becomes kind of hard for me to connect with all the insanity that's going on. I mean, it's all really impressive, the amount of detail that goes into every track is incredible, but it feels like it's going out of its way to be a more challenging listen that absolutely requires your full attention to get the most out of. I would not personally recommend jumping into this one if you've never heard anything from these guys before. At the very least, try LP5 first so you have a better idea of what you're getting into. Or you could just not listen to me. You want to just jump headfirst into the craziest extremes that IDM has to offer, you will get that. It's not the kind of project that's for everyone. I myself have limited patience for it and tend to be left cold by a lot of it. But I feel like if nothing else, even on the moments that don't work for me, I get the appeal and why they would work really well for other people. And I can't take away the moments from here that do properly resonate with me, because there are quite a few of those too. I mean, I'm sure this video will not mark the last time I ever listened to it. So long as VI, Scose, Poise, Pen, Expers, Bine, and obviously especially Cfern. As long as all those tracks are right there, I know I can at least get something out of it. I do like the project, I just don't love it. And I know lots of people out there do love it, so of course I can still co-sign it and give it my recommendation. Nothing here for the faint of heart, but still worth a shot for anyone curious. I'm overall feeling a 7.3 out of 10. But of course this is just my opinion, you can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.